Good morning, everyone at IIM. Thank you so much. As Professor Banerjee was speaking, I kind of cracked a wry smile. He talked a lot about the importance of self-belief. And actually, I, as a child, and hopefully you'll see me up there in a minute, really didn't have much of that. If there was one set of words my parents heard day in and day out from my mouth, they were, "No way, I can't. I can't ask for a spoon in a restaurant. I can't go to a friend's house." So that's me, at 7. And I was convinced that I couldn't do anything. I was scared of speaking in class. I was scared of doing my homework. I was scared of not doing my homework. There was no way to win. And for me, when I think about that 7-year-old child, to imagine myself today standing in front of a group of IIM students, that's unimaginable. And Professor Banerjee is right. Self-belief is the core of so many things. When I was planning for this talk, I didn't really know what I was doing here, so I spoke to a lot of my colleagues, some of whom are here today. And I asked them, what would you have wanted to know? And based on their inputs, I have 3 stories for you, which inspired me, which have pushed me forwards, to take me from a sense of I can't to really understanding what I can. Leaning into the things that terrified me most has led me to do a mountaineering course where I found myself hanging off a glacier with my crampons not quite sticking to the ice, to volunteering for and then running a suicide helpline as a student. And now to having the incredible privilege of showing up to work every single day with 50 inspiring people who have been crazy enough to choose to follow my lead. But that didn't happen overnight. And I'd really like to start with a story. And this is the story of my mother. You can see her on the right of that picture as a teenager. Anytime we'd speak to her friends, they'd say, she's always in shorts and t-shirts. My mother was an athlete, a little bit like Tanvi. And at the end of her college days, she in fact won herself a scholarship to be on the first group of women to climb Mount Everest. She was finishing college and she had that opportunity. But instead, she chose to get married, and a few short years later, she was in a traditional family in Udaipur, sari clad, the shorts and t-shirts were a lifetime away. And soon after her marriage, about a year or so, one of her closest friends came to Udaipur on honeymoon. And Bela Mausi called her to the side and just asked, "Nandita, are you okay here? This is a big change. Are you happy?" Like any concerned friend would. And Bela Mausi told me this story when I was a teenager, and my mother's response has always stayed with me. She said, "Bela, I'm happier than I ever could have been. Yes, I don't have the freedom to wear the clothes that I want to wear, but I have the freedom to think however I want. This family gives you freedom of thought and freedom of belief. There can be nothing that is more important to me." And my mother at the young age of 20, she got married at the age of 20, had understood this, that you have to choose what to change. You have to choose what parts of your environment you're willing to adapt yourself to, and what parts you will change within yourself. And my mother's continued to do this throughout her life. Like I said, I come from a relatively traditional family. We're a business home. And yet, as we were growing up, my mother fought tooth and nail for us to be able to go to schools and educational institutes which suited us. Not the ones that maybe looked the best, but the ones that would bring out the best in each of us. She was clear on what really mattered to her, and she was willing to compromise on the rest. She allowed us to study the things that we wanted to study. At university, I studied probably the most impractical, useless degree anyone could, right? I studied philosophy, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit. But my parents, and specifically my mother, allowed that to happen. Because she pushed boundaries, I have the ability to stand here and say that the most important thing I am doing with my life is building Dharohar. That's no more or no less than someone choosing to have a family. But my mother was clear on what she could and couldn't change. More importantly, on what she would and wouldn't change. How she did it has changed a lot over the years. But the clear priorities and the values that she lived by haven't. And I would say that that's the cornerstone of self-belief. understanding what really matters to you. You're not going to be able to change everything. In most cases, we have to adapt to the environment. But in places where we've chosen to take a stand, we can make that change. That brings me to my next story, which is the story of this slightly nondescript bright space, which we at Dharohar lovingly called the Khoj Center. This was on the 5th floor of Celebration Mall. Yes, Celebration Mall does have a 5th floor that no one knows about. It was a ghost town. And it was the first step in a journey, well, it was the first tangible step in a journey that had started out much earlier. When I was about 7 or 8, my parents would talk about creating a space that would change what learning looked like for children in Udaipur. We'd grown up here, my parents had moved to the UK, and as children and as parents, we'd experienced the difference between the education systems, and my parents wanted to make a change. That change couldn't happen then. They were busy trying to set up and grow the business. But in 2013, 2014, we'd been running our schools program for a year or so. We said, okay, let's make our first foray into a public space. A few years later, when we started to grow the Dharohar team, I had a young colleague join us. And look, Khoj Center wasn't successful. We'd get maybe 20 visitors in a week and we'd feel over the moon. That was a great week for us. And a few months into being with us, Anita turned around and said, Shivani, this is a waste of time. What are you doing this for? We're putting so much effort. Volunteers are putting so much effort. And it's all crap. She wasn't wrong. She really wasn't. We had these primary colors which didn't quite attract our target audience. We were in this godforsaken corner of a mall. Our activities weren't great. And yet, that was important because it was a step towards this, which is the space we're in right now. And I wouldn't even say we've reached all the way. We definitely haven't. But today, Third Space Mini, we've moved to a space in the center of Lake City Mall. And it's thriving. We have people running AWS, Amazon Web Services study groups here. We have people coming in and jamming. We've come a long way. But the thing that we had to learn was that we had to suck at doing something before we excelled. And this is the exact opposite of the story you get taught at school and at college. You get told, study this textbook, then give the exam. You only have one chance to give the exam. Screw it up and you're screwed. That's really not how change happens. No matter what your field, you have to do work, put it out there, get it wrong, and then get it slightly better. You can't go straight to doing it right? Tanvi talked about the many steps that her journey has had, the ways in which she's had to change how she thought that she'd be making that practice, making that impact. But you can only do that if you get started. Most of us, we wait in this bhram of, I can't, because we feel like we can't do it perfectly today, so we're not even willing to try. That I can't isn't an I can't, it's an I won't. I'm not willing to fail. But if you're not willing to suck, and if you're not actually willing to suck at things publicly, it's very hard to get to succeeding at things. And as the popular meme says, you can't skip to the good part. Like I said, for us, Third Space Mini is just Third Space Mini. It is still a pilot for this space, Third Space, which will hopefully be opening in July, August of next year, which is 14,000 square meters dedicated to curiosity and creation. And it's a daunting project to work on. I think my team and I are terrified and excited in equal measure. We know that even here we're going to make a lot of mistakes. But what we're clear on is we're committed to that journey and that vision that's going to make it happen. We'll get to the good part, but we know we can't skip to it. And that brings me to my third story. And this story is possibly one that you guys have heard before. And it's of this gentleman, Sir Donald Bradman, possibly one of the greatest cricketers of all time, certainly the greatest cricketer of the 19th century. When we think of sports people, we think of them as innately talented, as deeply athletic, as somehow different from us. But what's interesting about Sir Donald Bradman is this picture on the right. It's how he used to train as a small boy. Here he's replicating it for a video made much later on in life. So whilst his friends after school would go home and muck around, this man or this child, this boy, this 9, 10-year-old boy, very young, would go behind his house where there was a water tank, a round water tank. Take one stump from a wicket and a golf ball. A stump is about 1/3 the width of a cricket bat, and a golf ball is about half the size of a cricket ball. Not only that, it's not uniform, so it doesn't bounce straight. And he would spend hours and hours practicing his cover drives, his pull shots, his technique against this water tank. And this is something that people, at least I wish I had known about change. There is no secret. He just showed up day in, day out. Probably there were days where he didn't feel like it. It would have felt deathly boring. But he continued to show up. Most of us were willing to start that journey. We're willing to do the first week, right? We make New Year's resolutions and we'll say, I'm going to go to the gym every day. And we go for a week, and then the second week we go 3 times. And 6 months later, we wonder why we're not fitter, why our bodies haven't changed. We start to plan an event, we set up an organization, and we have discipline for the first few days. And then it tails off. That's what Professor Banerjee was saying. The root of self-belief is knowing that you have the discipline to show up day in, day out, especially to show up on the days where you don't feel like it. Those are the days where change happens. You can't see it. You can't see a child growing from this big to this big. But that kid is eating food and sleeping every day. That's why it's happening. If we don't have the self-respect and the self-belief to show up every day, change will not happen. And when I think back to that 7-year-old child that I was, there's nothing extraordinary about me. But I learned early on, being the youngest of 3 siblings, that and my brothers are 6 and 8 years older than me, I never wanted anything till I was about 20. But I learned really early on that I could show up every day. I could still play tennis against my brothers. I might lose every day, but I'll still do it. I had a lot of practice at showing up. And really, I think if you're clear about what you choose to focus on, what you're going to change, what you're not, if you're willing to suck before you succeed, and if you're willing to show up every day, because very few people are, you can change. Because actually, if it is to be, it's up to me. There is nobody else that can change my life, myself, and can change, therefore, the world around me. Thank you so much for your time.